There are no district highlights, so moving along to the superintendent's report. Ms. Hamburg.
All right, thank you. I'm actually going to go up to the podium and have a few folks join me tonight for our strategic plan presentation. All right, good evening. While we're getting that pulled up, board members, you should have a copy of the plan at your spot, as well as you, Ms. Marshall. I want to start by introducing our consultants with the Impact Group, Phil Herman and Tom Speaks. They are going to be helping to present here in just a moment. And they're going to give a quick overview of the process that we went through, and then I'm really excited to see so many of our committee members, and I want to take a moment to recognize them after they kind of introduce the process.
Thank you, Ms. Hamburg. This evening for the strategic plan presentation, we will be obviously doing the introduction. We're going to look at the foundational documents. So Westerville was really clear with us when we began that there are some core elements and some work that has already been done that, that you would like to see guide the strategic plan. And so we'll reintroduce those foundational documents. We'll look at the strategic planning process and introduce the committee, many of the members who are here this evening. And then we'll get into what are the priorities and objectives. So we'll look at how we got there to the priorities and objectives, and then we'll have team members share an overview of those priorities and each of the objectives. Lastly, we'll wrap up with what are some of the next steps? Where do we go from here in regard to the strategic plan, and answer any questions that you have as a board.
So good evening. As you recall, we first began to build our portrait of a graduate in 2017. And we developed the 6 competencies: social emotional wellness, adaptability, problem solving, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. And those skills which will prepare our students to contribute to the competitive and changing world in which we live, which our mission statement asks us to do. Our essential elements create the environment with which these competencies and our grade level standards are all taught in every classroom in our system. And together, they comprise our educational framework, which is the foundation of this strategic plan.
That's just a graphic with a little more detail on what Scott just spoke about. Okay, the next piece that we shared with our strategic planning committee was an overview. Carrie Dennis, our business manager, spent one of the evenings getting really in depth, and we've also done that for the board at one of our work sessions, so you're all familiar with that presentation. But we made sure that our committee was aware of our 10-year facilities master plan. I know it's hard to read on there, but just to give you an idea. And then we spent a lot of time getting feedback from them that we were able then to share with the board before you voted on that next phase. But we thought it was really important that they had the grounding in not only those educational documents, but also in what we were trying to do with our capital projects and our facilities. Okay, I do want to take a moment, and if you are, when I say your name, if you're here, could you please stand? And I do want to take a moment and do this because I think it's really important. When I tell you that these people gave a lot of time for this process, it was a lot of time, and I think there was one evening when it rained, but I think the rest of the time it was like the most beautiful weather you could ever imagine, like in May when everybody just wanted to be outside. 2.5-hour meetings. One night, poor Jennifer had ordered us pizza and it got delivered to the South concession stand. But other than that, we did feed them. We did get them some food that night as well. So it was a great time. The engagement was really, really strong, and I'm just super appreciative. The first meeting of this process was actually on my 3rd day of work. So I couldn't have asked for a better group to come in and just really kind of give feedback, get me up to speed, and just help drive this process from a community standpoint. So again, if you could just, I know not everyone is here, but I do want to say everyone's name, and we'll be reading some of this for the benefit of anyone watching this from the recording as well, so that you can hear who was on the committee. Ann Baldwin, Jack Brown, Amy Clifton, Mark Cooper, Jessica Diallo, Frank Dobson, Adam Flugie, Carly Foy, Aaron Frankauer, Linda Freeman Walker, Gertie Glass, Angie Goff, Lynn Harvey, Laura Hendricks, Patrick Hickman, Ryan Hilperts, Valerie Jasinski, Dr. Jennifer Knapp, Jesse Martin, Dr. Michelle Martin, Diaga Mabouge, Stephen McElroy, Olivia Mendlow, Celeste Miller, Kelly Modlick, Steve Munger, Dr. Nancy Nestor Baker, Eric Nickel, Sarah Novak, Amanda Osendorf, Meg Patton, Adam Porsche, Cheryl Welford, Latrice Reeves, Navia Robinson, Tammy Santa, Brian Shaw, Dr. Anitra Simmons, Shar Smith, Shelley Smith, Mark Smolik, Tim Stifler, Tabby Swain, Brianna Swanson, Doug Swartz, Kate Toma, Louise Valentine, Casey Walco, Katie Weber, Tracy White, Jennifer Winters, Molly Woodruff, Ken Wright, and Becca Yanni. In addition to those folks, we also had all of our members of the cabinet, if you're in here, would stand as well, that helped facilitate those groups. All right, so let's have a big round of applause for our planning committee. Additionally, we had originally aimed for our last board meeting to bring this to you, as you remember, but our committee gave us such good feedback at our last meeting. We felt like we needed to take a little more time with the revision on the objectives. We felt like the content of the objectives was in alignment with where it needed to be, but the feedback on some of our verbiage and our education needs was very well taken. And so we did move this a meeting, and still we have this great of a turnout. So just super appreciative to people giving up their evening here in July to come and spend the evening with us. So thank you. Phil? There we go.
So I'm going to give a quick overview of the process. You might remember when Tom and I were with you in February, we ran through the anticipated process for the strategic plan development. And for the most part, that was the process that we followed. There were a few places, and it happens in any strategic plan, where the process starts to get a little bit messy. The feedback is coming in. You're trying to decide on what the overarching priorities are, how we're going to organize it, how we're going to align all the different feedback that we're hearing. And this process was no different. We ran into some of those same bumps. And again, huge thank you to the committee members who would work through that with us and provide such enthusiastic feedback every single time we asked them to reflect in one of the meetings on the information that was put before them and to think about it critically. They did so with just full participation and enthusiasm. And then additionally, members of the cabinet, members of the administrative team, the board representatives, provided excellent feedback to us as well, and that really, really helped us continue to move through the process and ultimately generate the results you see before you this evening. The committee process, the committee met 5 times, and we began, again, those first 3 meetings where we really were exploring some of those foundational elements. So the very first meeting, we dug in on understanding the educational framework, mission, vision, and values of the Westernville City Schools. And in each one of the meetings, there was a time for learning or reflection or understanding the themes or results that the committee had produced in the previous meeting. But then there's also opportunities for the committee to engage with one another and provide feedback to us as facilitators based on what they had heard, either to elaborate on information that we needed more understanding from those participants, or to actually work on the work themselves in terms of developing some of the wording around priorities or objectives. And so in this first meeting, we focused on that educational framework and the mission, vision, and values of the school district. And then we asked the committee, what does Westernville City Schools most need to focus on in the next 3 years to promote the values and competencies represented in the portrait of a graduate and to prepare our students to be competitive and prepared for the world they will enter when they leave Westernville City Schools. And that's one example of some of the activities that they participate in through the process. Additionally, in that first meeting, they also began the SWOT process, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so the committee also provided us the strengths of Westerville City Schools at that point. In between meetings, we always compiled all the information that we heard and generated the themes so that we could begin listening for, are there common themes from either community input or the members of the committee that are continuing to surface throughout, and how do we organize those and prioritize those? In the second meeting, again, our opportunity for learning there was understanding the facilities master plan. And Carrie Dennis gave the overview of the facilities master plan at this meeting. And this meeting actually timed up with just before the board considering phase 2 of the facility master plan. You might remember, and so we were not only able to have the committee understand the importance of that plan over the recent years and where the district is headed, and and to reflect on what could that mean for the establishment of the priorities and the objectives in this plan, but also they were able to provide some instant feedback that we were able to share with you as the board was considering what components are considered in phase 2 of the master facilities plan or facility master plan, and what's not included in that. In the third meeting, in the second meeting, we also began the weaknesses of the SWOT analysis. We were able to focus on that. Where am I supposed to be pointing this?
Can you advance it, Jennifer, please?
Thank you. In the third meeting, we looked at the analysis and insights from the 3Q meetings. So in the fall and in the winter, Dr. Clark and members of the administrative team had a whole series of meetings with internal members of the school community, external members of the school community, asking about what they like about the schools, what they see as the challenges of the school district, as well as they're interested, what are their interests in the characteristics of a superintendent. And so those likes and challenges were all compiled by the administrative team into primary themes. And then we were able to engage the committee in looking at that information and to ask them to also look at the summary of themes and to provide feedback on what did they see as those top priorities from all the information that had been collected from those meetings, and why do they believe that those particular themes evolved from our stakeholders? So we were able to go deeper into that data with the members of the committee that were also representing so many different positions and roles within the community and within the schools. Again, when we have these engaging conversations every time and collect all that information, we begin to see overarching themes. And what was interesting is the themes that we heard from the committee were also aligning with the themes that came from those questions or those 3Q meetings, which is great when we see that, because it's a nice confirmation across the board that that's how people in the community feel. From there, between the third and fourth meeting, we had an opportunity to work with the cabinet and the Board of Education representatives. We looked at all the information that we had before us and those themes that we're surfacing to begin to establish the overarching priorities. And at that point, we established 5 priorities to bring back to the committee. We brought those 5 priorities, and we asked for feedback on those priorities, and we asked the committee to begin writing objectives based on everything that they had learned so far and that they had already talked about. They began writing the objectives for each of those priorities, the first draft of those objectives. Each of the subgroups of the committee began working on objectives that evening. Then all the committees rotated through and looked at the work of each of the other subcommittees that evening. We did a gallery walk, and they provided instant feedback. And then the subcommittees that evening had a chance to rewrite their objectives. So we had 2 swipes at it in the very first time of our first drafts of the creation of the objectives. And in the weeks that followed that, as we began to work with the cabinet, the district leadership team, members of the teaching and learning team, members of the different departments, we got feedback about these priorities. So these, and the objectives. So these were the first draft priorities that you can see, those 5 that were up there on the left side. And as we were looking at the objectives that were written, it became pretty clear that many of the objectives aligned with the essential elements of quality instruction. And there was a really important conversation with the leadership team in those different groups and the board representatives to say, are we missing an opportunity to align the strategic plan to one of the really guiding documents and foundational documents of the school district? And are we creating confusion by having a strategic plan and also having the educational framework? And which one are we following? Are we working towards the educational framework? Or are we following a strategic plan? Particularly when so many of the objectives align to the educational framework. And so we said, well, wait a minute, let's pause and look at these objectives and align these objectives and see, do they all have a home underneath those essential elements? And most of them had a home underneath the essential elements and helped advance that work. But not all of them had a home. As we began to realize that it was some of the elements that were really around finance, facilities, the communication and transparency. Some of those objectives are really more about supporting those first 3 priorities. And so what we ended up doing was saying the overarching priorities have already been created in the essential elements of high quality instruction as part of the educational framework, but there's a 4th, and that's really about managing resources to support the implementation of the educational framework. And so that took us back then to revising those objectives and multiple more swipes. So we brought those objectives back to the committee overall. They really liked the alignment and felt as though the content that had been created in the plan absolutely captured all that they had learned and all they had discussed and the feedback that they had heard from the community. But we had some work to do on the objective language. They felt as though the swipe at that point was 2 educational leads, was speaking too high, using too many terms, and was too wordy. And so there was strong encouragement to whittle those down and to bring those objectives in tighter. And that was the work that we have been doing between the last meeting and this evening. In that 5th meeting, again, these are some of the reflection questions that we asked of the committee that helped us come to those results. Tom's going to talk to you for just a moment about what is before you tonight in the plan in terms of priorities, objectives, and some of the subcomponents in terms of the work ahead.
Thanks, Phil. So you're going to continue to see throughout this entire process priorities, objectives, action steps. This plan has 4 priorities. There are 17 objectives. A priority is a high-level focus area in an organization that identifies what is critical to its long-term success. An objective is a specific measurable goal or target an organization sets to achieve its priorities. This is what you're voting on this evening. This is the strategic direction of the district that everyone has weighed in upon, which is excellent. So we're ready to go. The next piece here, hit this. The next piece is the action steps. Okay, so an action step, this is tactical. And actually, your leadership team began to get into this today. This is who is doing what, when, and how is it measurable, right? This is the rubber meeting the road. So the action steps, understand that is actually the plan itself. This is the plan over the next year is this occurring. And the main steps which we're establishing this for are the baseline, recommendations, implementation, and measurement. So baseline, we need to first establish for each of these objectives, where are we right now? What's going well? What do we need to improve? Where are we right now to establish that baseline? We establish a date for that. The next is recommendations. From our baseline, what do we have to do specifically to go from our baseline to the intent of the objective? Implementation, when do we begin to implement this? And then measurement, when do we measure to report out the fact that we are indeed meeting that objective? As we move forward, you're going to see in the next weeks and months, as the administration begins to build specific timelines and ownership of those, that'll be made available to you all. But this is how we're going to roll it out moving forward.
All right, so with that, and there are copies of the plan in the back. If you did not get one and you would like one, board members and Ms. Marshall, as I said, you should all already have one at your seat. We are going to go through and just share, and for the sake of the streaming, we are going to read these, but I would also advise you, if you go to the agenda online, there is a PDF of this presentation and of the plan, so if community members want to see either of those documents, they are available. And with that, Gertie Glass is going to read through our first set of objectives for safe and inclusive environments. WCS staff are trusted adults who develop and provide spaces that are physically and mentally safe, values diversity and student authenticity. As a result, students are seen, heard, celebrated, and are able to thrive, grow, and take risks.
Objective number 1.1, promote the development of the whole child and cultivate relationships among students, staff, families, and the community. Objective 1.2, create accessible learning environments to ensure every student feels empowered and experiences a sense of belonging through a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Objective 1.3, develop and implement clear and consistent two-way communication systems and accessible formats to inform and engage internal and external members of the school community. Objective 1.4, implement recruiting, hiring, and retention practices to secure a high-quality staff that is more reflective of the diversity of our students. Objective 1.5, implement a comprehensive system of support for employees to include training, mentorship, clear communication of expectations and opportunities for collaboration and leadership. Objective 1.6, establish clear standards and metrics to evaluate safety, functionality, inclusivity, and quality assurance protocols within our learning and working environments.
Thank you, Gertie. And we are going to have a Q&A session at the end for the board, but I do want to pause after each of the priorities and just see if you have any initial questions on the objectives in that section. Okay. Great, we'll move on to priority 2. We have student-centered learning. WCS staff facilitate student learning focused on the individual and collective needs of students, shared responsibility for learning and alignment to grade level standards, while creating opportunities for student voice, choice, and interests. Student-centered learning results in empowering students to be contributors of ideas, solutions, and talents in their local and global communities. 2.1, implement a multi-tiered system of supports, which is often referred to as MTSS, and you can see we've linked in, since that's a big education term, there's a link there, so if you go to the online version, which we will have this on our website after you hopefully approve it, so folks can go in and get a little bit better idea of what that is, because that will be a huge focus area for us over the next couple of years. But an MTSS framework to address academic, behavioral, and social emotional growth. And this is a good time to pause and just say, one of the things, we obviously talked about wanting to ground these objectives in the documents we already have, but an important piece too was that we were including work that was already started. So you're not seeing in front of you 17 brand new objectives. Hey staff, by the way, here you go. A lot of these things our staff members are already working on, our teams are already working on. So this is in various phases of implementation throughout our buildings, and depending on if it's the academic, behavior, or social emotional growth side. So we want a system, a systemic system that we can use across the district. Create family and community engagement opportunities to enhance learning experiences for our students and encourage a sense of belonging and unity. Provide ongoing professional development for all staff focused on culturally responsive practices that promote student achievement, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, I'll pause there to see if you have any questions so far on objective 2 or priority 2. All right. Next up, priority 3, which is clear evidence and application of learning. And our Deputy Superintendent, Scott Dorn, is going to share these objectives. WCF staff provides students various opportunities and options to demonstrate growth, understanding, and mastery of the grade level standards through regular formative and summative feedback, and help students connect that learning to their future path through and beyond pre-K-12 education.
Objective 3.1, provide all students opportunities to demonstrate the application of critical thinking, innovative problem solving, and collaboration through learning experiences relevant to the demands of the modern workforce. Objective 3.2, provide all students with choices in a variety of future pathways and options to demonstrate mastery of grade level standards. And Objective 3.3, develop processes to evaluate the effectiveness of programming and resource allocation, prioritizing impact on student learning.
And I just wanted to add and highlight that last one is one that Nicole and Scott and I have been talking about a lot. Scott, we attended a workshop the state put on that gave us a really good tool for that. And so, you know, as we look at our continual challenges with state funding, other revenue sources, and growing needs that our students have, we really want to make sure that we have a strategic, systemic way of looking at the programs we have, evaluating the impact they're having on kids and what they're costing us. And so that's going to be a big area that we're planning to focus on this year. So I'm really excited about that. Questions on 3? All right, cruising right along. Number 4. And I love this little icon that they made. So I just want to point out that it's juggling the 3 other icons. So manage resources responsibly to support the educational framework. WCS staff are dedicated to advancing the educational framework through strategic initiatives and sound financial practices. Our efforts will promote financial stewardship, transparency, and accountability while aligning with educational goals, community expectations, regulatory requirements, and sustainability principles. Objective 4.1, develop and integrate technology systems for data collection, analysis, and reporting to showcase the effectiveness of district initiatives. 4.2, utilize a comprehensive resource allocation framework that aligns budgetary decisions with the district's values and strategic priorities. And again, I just want to emphasize, it's not that we're not doing any of this, it's being more strategic about how we do it moving forward. 4.3, promote financial stewardship, transparency, and accountability to ensure all financial activities support the district's mission and strategic goals. 4.4, ensure the district remains responsive and resilient to changing demographics, technology, educational needs, and resource availability. And we had a lot of great conversation around this one with the committee and especially the community members on this one. So I think that's a really exciting objective for us to make sure that we're staying on top of all the current changes. And 4.5, align the facilities master plan with educational goals, community expectations, regulatory requirements, and sustainability principles while addressing the school district's current and future needs and enhancing operational efficiency. So there you have all the objectives. We'll have, like I said, a general question session here in a moment, but any questions on priority 4 with the managing of resources?
I just have one on objective 4.2 because I know everyone worked really hard to get the language. It's very understandable. So I'm just wondering, Ms. Marshall, since, you know, we talked about how we already have, we're already working on all these, but we're going to continue to make them more systemic. Can you just talk to people sort of in English about resource allocation framework and what that means to you, what we're already doing in that regard, and I'm just trying to make it really understandable.
Yeah, so I think the best way to sort of explain that is to just sort of talk about what we're already doing. So we continually look at the 5-year forecast. As you know, I bring it to the board twice a year, but it is a document that's updated periodically throughout the year as we go through different planning phases and things like that. We start our conversations around the next year's budget cycle in January. All of our departments and buildings receive spreadsheets. They are creating their goals in their buildings and departments, and they're aligning all of their resources and their budgetary needs based on what they're creating. And that's based on whatever our district goal is and how all of that models through. And so that is something that we're currently doing. We continue to have opportunities for adjustments throughout the year as we know things can change. We have 2 periods during the year specifically where they can sort of move money between accounts and things like that as the needs change and that sort of thing. So that's what we do now. I think that this fits right in line with that. It's just sort of memorializing it in a document and what we currently do.
I think too, as we are adopting these strategic objectives, it gives us an opportunity to have a conversation with Nicole and her team about, are we allocating the resources? So if our community says one of these is a priority and we're not really allocating resources toward it, then maybe we need to look at another area where we can move some resources. And so I think it helps us make sure that we're putting our resources where we say our priorities are.
Yeah, and I do just want to mention, like, those conversations around the budget, so they start in January. You know, they all receive spreadsheets, but each individual department and building, they're meeting with their teams to work together to develop that budget. We go into each of the buildings and each of the departments and meet with all of them and go over it. It's me, the deputy superintendent, our assistant treasurer, my fiscal coordinator. We sit down and we look at where are the gaps, what are you looking at for next year, what are your goals, and we have all of those conversations as part of those meetings. And they're working with their team before we ever get to that spot. So.
Great. Thank you for walking through that, because I know one of the things I've really appreciated learning about the last few years, and you've put a lot of effort into, is doing those building meetings and making sure they're face-to-face and you really have a sit-down, with building leadership. And so I think it's just important that people understand how you're already working towards, what that framework looks like now, but appreciate too, thinking about in the future, looking even more closely now that we have the rest of the strategic plan in place, how to align with it. So thanks for walking through that.
Yeah, and I will say, like, every department does this, right? So the teaching and learning team, they're meeting with the building principals and their directors and coordinators as they're thinking about their goals and their allocation of resources for the next year. I know Carrie and Doug visit with all of the building principals to talk about what's needed for facilities and those sorts of things. So I think as an organization, we do this at every level, all throughout the organization.
And you will see other objectives again in here that we wanted to make sure, to Nicole's point, we memorialized them because we didn't want them to fall off. It wasn't like, oh, we're replacing them with other priorities. This should always be a priority for us. Any other questions on objectives under priority 4? All right.
So next steps. We hope that the board will approve the plan this evening. If the board approves the plan this evening, we move forward with the identification of chairs and co-chairs for each objective. Chairs and co-chairs for each objective are typically members of the administrative team or leaders within the school district staff that become the champion of that objective. It doesn't mean they're the czar of that objective. They're not driving it all by themselves. It means that they're making sure that those steps that Tom went over, the baseline, the recommendations, the implementation, the measures, that they're bringing the right people to the table to keep advancing that work, that we're sticking to the timelines that we established for that work. So establishment of chairs and co-chairs, and then establishing the timeline. What are the timelines? What are the timelines for the baseline and the recommendations? Typically, then you establish the timelines for the implementation later. You don't really know exactly when you're going to be implementing those particular objectives until you've had an opportunity to say, what are you recommending? Where are we today, and what are we recommending to advance that work from where we are today? And so we established those baseline and recommendation timelines, and then eventually the implementation and measurement timelines. And then the teams get to work. Those 4 action steps for each of those objectives, that is the work of the plan in the coming years. And as Mrs. Hamburg already pointed out, some of those objectives are continuation of work that's underway. And so it's going to be easier to establish a baseline and the recommendations because you're already doing some of that, some of the work that's represented in this plan. Others will have a longer leeway and a longer run-up. And here's the other thing. There are 17 objectives, and it's intended to be a multi-year plan. You can't do it all at once. And so there should be some of these priorities that take a longer term or a longer runway to actually get really underway with them. And then periodic updates to the Board of Education, to the community. And so I think Mrs. Hamburg was talking about quarterly updates on the strategic plan. That would be typical for many school districts who are implementing strategic plan to provide quarterly updates. How are we doing? How are we doing in terms of making the progress on our baseline? And ultimately, what are our recommendations? And where are we in implementing these steps? And so that's what's coming next. And that's what really over the course of coming months, but also years. Any other points you want to talk about next steps?
We just shared too that we plan on rolling all of this out at our all admin retreat on July 31st, and then more importantly to our entire staff at convocation on August 9th. So we can get everybody on the same page with where we want to focus our work. Questions? Comments?
Well, I want to start by thanking everybody for all of this work and the thoughtfulness that went into it, the time that people put into it. Really appreciate that we were able to get feedback, in real time as we're making decisions as a board too. So thank you all for taking your time during the summer too to come here tonight as well. I do just have one question. I appreciate that we're going to be doing quarterly updates. I'm wondering if there's some, and I know that we haven't gotten that far yet because we haven't moved towards the implementation and the actions and all that. But if there's some sort of like visual that we would be able to be put up online, just so if somebody was curious of how we're doing, just check in and if that would be possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg and his team have been involved in this process, and so I would be leaning heavily on them to help us create those visuals so that we can keep our community updated. We've also talked about, I know Phil's team is planning on making us would you say like 11 by 17 document that kind of has a visual of these. And then we talked about like being able to simplify some of that language to where we can also have that translated into some of our main languages for our families as well, and be able to put that online too. So we thought that was an important priority and was brought up several times by our committee about making sure everybody had access.
That's great. And also I just want to say thanks for like not creating 17 new things and really bringing everything that we have together into one document. It's really exciting.
I really appreciate the opportunity to have watched the process. And I thank both of you, I thank all of our team, and I certainly want to echo what Christy was saying, thank everyone who chose to work on the committee. And beyond that, I so appreciate that this is not a plan that was created in a vacuum. It's not a theoretical plan. Theoretical plans look lovely, and they can have great visuals. But if they're not grounded in the work that's already been going on, if they're not grounded in the community itself, they're nothing more than something pretty. So this is not that kind of strategic plan. This is the kind of strategic plan that, as I've said to some of you before, is triangulated. It focuses on the information that we have, the work we've been doing, and what our community members and our staff members have been saying. This aligns all of those pieces and creates out of all of those many easel sheets and all of those sticky red dots and all of those 3Q conversations, it brings all of those pieces together. And that is a difficult thing to do, but you've done it very, very well, and I heartily commend you, all of you, for the work that you did to create this real life plan. Thank you.
So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for everyone that was involved in your time and your talent that you shared. I am super excited to watch this come to fruition. And if there's anything I can do to help support that, please let me know. I'm all in.
I have, well, a couple of things. Like everybody else, I want to express my gratitude. I mean, it is not easy, especially those of you with kids and families, to pull yourself away to come and, talk about strategic plans in the summer on a lovely evening. So really, thank you. My question really is for the impact group, because I always think it's great when you have the opportunity to get an outside perspective on your school district, to take a moment to do that. And you all probably worked with lots of districts on strategic plans, and every district has its own sort of personality. And this might sound like a weird sort of generic question, but I'm really curious about what strikes you about Westerville, right? That's like, we don't know the water we swim in, so tell us what it looks like.
Yeah,
How
well-
are we different, unique? What are we?
So one of the things I was really struck by, and Tom, feel free to jump in here as well. One of the things I was struck by was the sense of community, collective community, even in a district that has multiple high schools. And sometimes when we work in districts with multiple high schools, there's not that same sense of collective community, the we are Westerville, and you have that, which is something that's really, really powerful and should be cherished here. And I don't even know if you know that that's not a thing in other places, right? But it's in some cases it's not a thing. Certainly. You have an amazing team. I mean, I have, the next slide says thank you, and there's some thank yous I wanted to say, of course, to the Board of Education for the opportunity to do this work, but also to the committee members who were representative of the community. Again, the level of enthusiasm and engagement for the schools, for the work that the schools are doing, was, typically attendance falls off in a lot of places we work. You get that first meeting, and then attendance falls off. Attendance didn't fall off here, and I was worried about it every time with those nice sunny days that she was talking about. I was worried every time, and attendance never fell off. And there was that level of engagement, and that speaks very powerfully as well. The other thing that really, really stood out to me was the foundational documents, right? So that educational framework with the essential elements of high-quality instruction, the portrait of a graduate, and all that had been done already within the school district. Plus the master facilities plan, our facilities master plan, that's unusual to have that be that clear on the educational framework and what you're desiring to do instructionally, and so. It was really kind of a little bit of a challenging process because I wish we would have had that vision to more closely align this earlier. But once we realized this strategic plan is actually aligning to so well to the work that's already been done, it really became fun at that point to align those objectives. So those are some things that just immediately jump out for me.
I agree with everything Phil said, with the added addition of civility. We do a lot of work throughout Ohio and beyond, and there were some very diverse opinions here. There's some different people with different ideas, and everyone, they addressed things with kindness and with thoughtfulness, and everyone had an opportunity to say what was on their hearts, and it was respected, and that's not always the case. So once again, it's a high-performing district with a lot of really intelligent and thoughtful people, and what struck me is just civility and sense of community. It was really an honor to be a part of it.
Thank you. Thanks. And I went to I went to school here back when the North-South rivalry was a real thing. So I'm just glad we're in a new space.
And I think, Phil, you said you started your thank yous, but did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
I did also, in addition to the Board of Education and the committee members, I did want to thank the cabinet has been so enthusiastic and supportive and helpful for any questions that I had, clarification that I need, history, background, been really helpful. Especially working with Nicole and Scott Dorn and Angie. You guys have been amazing as far as just the support for me. Nicole, I think, was my first support and the first cell phone number I had, and unfortunately, she just had to keep pointing me to other people because she was the only cell phone number I had at first. But I just really appreciated that type of cooperation and spirit throughout. So thank you all.
And I know I already thanked the committee, but I do have one more thank you. They didn't want to be on the committee list, but the three ladies at the back table there, who will be very embarrassed by that, but Jennifer, Krista, and Kylie, most importantly, they fed us every meeting and organized all that, had everything set up, the room set up, just all that behind-the-scenes work. Jennifer did all the emailing to the committee and sending everything back and forth with Phil, so just really appreciate all their support on making this a reality. And with that, if you don't have anything else, that is the entire presentation that we have for you tonight. All right.
Sorry, I just have one more question.
Sure.
So I was actually part of the 2017 Strategic Planning Committee just as a mom. And so obviously we're doing this again in 2024. Is there a plan for how long of a life cycle this will have? Or is this going to just kind of live in perpetuity until we've met goals? Like, what's the plan for that?
My hope is to keep it as, so we talked about chairs for each of the objectives, but I'm going to take the role as the chair of the plan and make sure that it continues to evolve. And so I think as we get to a point and things are met, he talked about 3 years typically, but I think instead of just abandoning this, it's pulling our committee back together and, you know, maybe adding folks as we evolve and just getting input on what additional goals, or when we feel we've met, we can kind of share that out and replace. But I don't want to, I'd like to continue to use this one as best we can.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.